What if I told you the single most trusted name in American farming just ghosted the country it helped build without warning? This isn't a rumor. This is John Deere quietly walking off the job. And no one, not the farmers, not the factory towns, not even the politicians, was ready for what came next. We're talking about more than just machines. This is the collapse of a legacy. Layoffs hit like a thunderclap. Small towns are folding, and in the middle of it all, a silent exodus to Mexico, masked as strategy. Why is America's farming icon cutting and running? What did Trump say that sent Wall Street into a tailspin? And could this one move kill the future of American agriculture? What's happening? What if the company you trusted your livelihood with made it illegal to fix your own tractor? That's not science fiction. That's John Deere in the 21st century. In recent years, Deere has taken an aggressive approach to control over its machinery. Modern John Deere equipment now runs on proprietary software, code that is protected, locked, and nearly impossible for farmers or independent mechanics to access. This means if a sensor fails, or if a routine error code flashes, the farmer cannot simply repair it themselves. They have to call an authorized John Deere technician. They have to pay whatever the company demands, and often they have to wait, sometimes for days, just to get a basic fix. The result? Outrage. Pure, unfiltered outrage. Across the country, farmers began to speak out. They filmed videos, gave interviews, and testified before lawmakers. They told stories of harvests lost because a technician could not arrive in time. They shared invoices showing hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars spent just to perform simple diagnostics. For farmers who are already fighting to stay above water, this kind of forced dependence is a punch to the gut. That's how the Right to Repair movement was born. What started as quiet frustration turned into a national rebellion. Farmers, mechanics, and consumers joined forces, demanding that companies like Deere unlock their equipment and allow owners to perform their own repairs. The movement gained steam, politicians took notice, and eventually, some states started to act. Colorado, for instance, passed a law requiring agricultural manufacturers to make repair tools and software available to owners and independent shops. But for many farmers, it was too little, too late. Years of being gouged and restricted had already done the damage. And as trust eroded, competitors saw an opening. Brands like AGCO and Kubota began marketing themselves as repair-friendly. Smaller manufacturers, even some from abroad, started gaining market share. The green monopoly that once ruled the fields was starting to fracture. What made this betrayal so painful was that it didn't feel like a business decision. It felt like a deliberate slap in the face. Farmers who had been loyal for decades suddenly realized they weren't customers anymore. They were captives. And while farmers left Deere behind, global forces were already crashing in. The crop collapse, China's ag independence. Farmers expected China to save them. Instead, it helped sink them. American agriculture operated under one core assumption: that China would always be a massive, reliable buyer. A rising middle class, a growing population, limited arable land. The math seemed obvious. China would need American corn, it would need American soybeans, and American wheat. But that assumption turned out to be disastrously wrong. Over the past 5 years, China has done something no one in the United States expected. It became agriculturally independent. Through massive investments in domestic farming, government subsidies, land consolidation, and cutting-edge research, China has built an internal food supply system that is stronger and more productive than ever before. High-yield seeds, drone-based monitoring, climate-controlled greenhouses. China embraced innovation at a scale that stunned U.S. analysts. And the result? American crop exports to China plummeted. Corn prices dropped by 37%. Soybeans fell by 24%. Wheat down by 35%. For farmers already squeezed by inflation and land costs, this collapse was brutal. Profit margins disappeared, loans went unpaid, equipment purchases were delayed or canceled outright, and once again, John Deere took the hit. Because when farmers don't earn, they don't buy, and when they don't buy, manufacturers bleed. But this was more than just a numbers game. This was a wake-up call. The entire global trade model that U.S. agriculture was built on began to crack. The promise that China would be a forever market had turned into a mirage. American farmers were left scrambling, and John Deere, already reeling from domestic backlash, backlash suddenly found itself facing an international economic earthquake. And just as markets collapsed, Deere made the move that would ignite a firestorm. We pored over hundreds of pages of export logs, court filings, and factory records to tell this story. If you value independent reporting like this, hit subscribe. We're just getting started. The Mexico shift. When Deere announced it was moving jobs to Mexico, the backlash wasn't just loud, it was seismic. In an official statement, the company called it a strategic decision, necessary to stay competitive in a challenging global market. They said it would help streamline operations and reinvest in innovation. But to the thousands of American workers and farmers watching from the heartland, it felt like something else. It felt like betrayal. The plan was straightforward. Shift production of cabs and certain assemblies to a facility in Mexico, where labor is cheaper and regulations are less restrictive. On paper, it made business sense, but in practice, it struck a nerve that hadn't stopped throbbing since the first round of layoffs years earlier. This wasn't just about economics. It was about identity. It was about a company that had once defined American grit, now outsourcing its future to another country. It was about workers who had spent 30 years on a factory floor, now being told they were too expensive to keep. The backlash was instant. Protests erupted outside Deere factories. Union leaders took to the airwaves. Farmers called local radio shows and vowed to never buy green again. Politicians, both local and national, demanded answers. The anger wasn't just about job loss. It was about the idea that John Deere was now part of the same corporate outsourcing machine that had gutted so many other American industries. For many, this wasn't just a disappointment. It was the final straw, but the loudest voice came from Mar-a-Lago, and it shook Wall Street. Trump declares war. Trump didn't just tweet, he threatened economic annihilation. Within days of John Deere's announcement that it would move part of its manufacturing operations to Mexico, Donald Trump, never one to back down from a corporate showdown, stepped onto the stage with his signature blend of populist fire and protectionist fury.
Mexico, I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States.
During a rally in Ohio, the president did not mince words. He promised that if John Deere followed through with its plans, he would impose a 200% tariff on any equipment the company tried to import back into the United States. The message was clear: if you leave, you pay. From his battle with China to his threats against General Motors and Ford, Trump had shown the world that he was willing to rewrite trade rules to favor American workers. The precedent was there, and the markets knew it. Investors panicked. Deere's stock dropped by more than 1.5% in after-hours trading. Wall Street analysts warned that such a tariff would cripple Deere's supply chain, raise domestic prices, and potentially spark retaliatory actions from trade partners. Trump's framing of the situation was politically potent. He positioned John Deere as a symbol of corporate betrayal, an American icon turning its back on its country for cheaper labor across the border. He told his audience that companies like Deere used to build America, and now they're building factories in Mexico, while towns in Iowa rot. His rhetoric resonated. Farmers who once supported Deere now felt vindicated in their growing discontent. Factory workers who had feared layoffs now saw a potential champion in Trump. But Trump's fight with Deere wasn't just about tariffs. It wasn't even just about jobs. It was about control, about who gets to define the future of American manufacturing and who doesn't. And in that war, tariffs were just the first volley, because while Trump made headlines, the real rebellion was happening on the ground. But this wasn't just about tariffs, it was about power, and that power was shifting fast in places Deere never expected. And as Americans turned their backs, another player stepped forward, one that had been quietly preparing to replace Deere all along. The tech tsunami, China's cheap machines take over, while America argues, China builds. And John Deere is no longer the global favorite. As American farmers wrestled with soaring costs and broken trust, Chinese manufacturers moved in with military precision. YTO Group, Zoomlion, Photon Loval. Once obscure names in Western markets, these companies are now becoming dominant players in agricultural equipment across the developing world and increasingly in the West. Why? Price. A mid-tier Chinese tractor costs as much as 50% less than a comparable Deere model. Harvesters, sprayers, and seeders come with fewer bells and whistles, but they work and they're affordable. In countries like Brazil, Nigeria, and Vietnam, governments are partnering with Chinese firms to rapidly mechanize their agriculture without the price tag of Western giants. And now these machines are landing in the US too, first through gray markets, then through official distributors. This shift isn't just about price, it's about presence. Chinese companies are offering aggressive financing, after-sale support, and full ecosystem packages. One-stop solutions from soil prep to crop monitoring. Deere, meanwhile, is struggling to hold on to its traditional markets, losing not only the trust of American farmers, but also its export dominance. Even loyal Deere customers are starting to ask hard questions. If a tractor from China costs half as much, lasts 10 years, and can be repaired locally, why stay green? For cash-strapped farmers staring at bankruptcy, the answer becomes easier every season. And in developing nations, where every dollar counts, the decision was made years ago. China's agricultural equipment sector is expanding faster than anyone predicted. With strong government backing, relentless cost-cutting, and a laser focus on scalability. These faced with outsourcing, repair restrictions, and rising costs, high-tech solutions feel hollow. What makes this gamble even riskier is how unbalanced it is. Deere is betting big on large corporate farms, the kind of operations that can afford autonomous combines and smart field analytics. But small and mid, a farming collapse that is spreading from the fields to the foundations of America itself, the immigration time bomb. 70% of farm workers in the United States are immigrants. That's not a political talking point. It's the reality that feeds the country. From sunrise to sundown, immigrant labor powers the harvests, moves produce through supply chains, and keeps grocery shelves stocked. But now that entire workforce is on the brink of collapse. President Donald Trump has revived his most aggressive immigration rhetoric, promising to unleash a wave of deportations. His plan? Mobilize the military and immigration and customs enforcement to arrest and remove undocumented workers en masse. For American agriculture, that promise isn't just controversial, it's catastrophic. This isn't a new threat. During his first term, Trump's crackdowns on immigration sent shockwaves through the farming industry. In the year 2018 alone, farms in California, Arizona, and Florida reported thousands of unfilled labor positions. Crops were left to rot in the fields because there simply weren't enough workers to pick them. And now, with talk of even stricter enforcement, farmers are sounding the alarm louder than ever. Without immigrant labor, the American food system cannot function. The labor shortage has already begun to tighten. In many farming regions, employers are scrambling to find replacements, offering signing bonuses, higher wages, and even housing assistance. But the reality is simple. Most Americans do not want to do this work. It is exhausting, low margin, and seasonal. As fewer workers are available, wages are rising rapidly, putting more strain on already struggling farms. For small and medium-sized operations, this is a breaking point. Labor costs spike while crop prices fall. The math just doesn't work, and the consumer doesn't escape the fallout. As farm operating costs climb, the price of food follows. Grocery bills are already rising due to inflation, but without a stable workforce, the pace could accelerate. Tomatoes, lettuce, berries, entire produce categories may become unaffordable or scarce. The United States risks becoming dependent on imports for foods it once grew domestically. The irony is brutal. In the name of nationalism, we may outsource our entire food supply. But beyond wages and policy debates lies the human cost. Many immigrant workers have lived in the United States for decades. They've raised families, paid taxes, and kept the food supply chain alive through pandemics, wildfires, and economic crashes. Now they face deportation, not because they broke new laws, but because the political winds have shifted. The uncertainty is destroying morale in farm communities. Families are being torn apart. Long-trusted labor pipelines are drying up. The consequences go far beyond this season's harvest. Without a stable legal pathway for agricultural labor, American farming will buckle. Trump's policies may score points with his base, but they risk collapsing the very system they claim to defend. This isn't just about ideology. It's about who picks the food we all eat. And the longer this crisis goes unresolved, the more permanent the damage becomes. But as the labor force disappears, so do entire farms. And the farmers who remain face a threat no subsidy can fix. Climate collapse on the horizon. Floods, droughts, fires. Climate change isn't coming for agriculture. It's already here. In the past 5 years alone, American farmers have faced some of the most extreme and unpredictable weather events in recorded history. And the consequences are staggering. entire seasons wiped out by torrential rain, crops shriveled under record-breaking heat waves, wildfires engulfing hundreds of thousands of acres. For the people who feed this country, every forecast now carries a sense of dread. The Midwest, once called America's breadbasket, is now seeing longer dry spells and heavier downpours, both of which disrupt planting and harvest cycles. California's Central Valley, responsible for over 1/3 of the nation's vegetables, is battling chronic water shortages. Florida's citrus farms face hurricane devastation and invasive pests. And across the country, insurance costs for farms are spiking, if coverage is even available. Irrigation, once a reliable safeguard, is becoming a luxury. As water rights dry up and infrastructure ages, more farmers are forced to drill deeper or pay more to keep crops alive. But water is only part of the problem. Warming temperatures are expanding the range of pests and plant diseases, introducing threats to crops that farmers have never faced before. Some are adapting, planting new crop varieties, shifting planting calendars, and investing in precision agriculture to minimize waste. But adaptation isn't free. It costs time, training, and money, resources that small farmers, in particular, lack. And while big agribusinesses can afford to pivot, smaller operations are left gambling on every decision, hoping that one bad season doesn't destroy everything. John Deere has tried to capitalize on this shift by developing electric tractors, smart irrigation platforms, and emissions-friendly equipment. On paper, these innovations could help farmers reduce their environmental impact. But again, the issue is access. These tools are often bundled into expensive packages that require subscription models, proprietary software, and dealer-only maintenance. In other words, climate adaptation has become another form of financial gatekeeping. So is there any way back? Or is this truly the end of American farming as we know it? Deere's reinvention gamble. Can innovation save a company that abandoned its base? That is the billion-dollar question now facing John Deere. After decades of dominance and a recent plunge into controversy, Deere has begun a strategic pivot. It is no longer just building tractors. It is trying to build redemption. The company's reinvention plan centers on electric farming equipment, sustainability platforms, and precision agriculture powered by artificial intelligence. From autonomous sprayers to battery-powered cultivators, Deere wants to be seen as the green tech leader in the agricultural world. But while the machines might evolve, the reputation is still stuck in reverse. The electric tractor rollout has received mixed reactions. On the one hand, the environmental push is real. Deere's engineers have unveiled prototypes that eliminate diesel entirely, lowering emissions and operating costs over the long term. They have also developed subscription-based digital systems that help farmers track soil health, water usage, and carbon offsets, turning tractors into mobile data centers. But the problem is not the tech, it is the trust. Farmers are skeptical, and many openly resent Deere's attempt to pivot toward the future without repairing the damage of the past. For a company that alienated its companies are now poised to dominate the 21st century farming landscape. John Deere, once the undisputed champion, is now just one contender in a brutal global race. And looming behind all of this is a crisis no machine can fix. Size farms, the backbone of American agriculture for generations, are being priced out of the innovation wave entirely. The question is not whether Deere's technology works, it is whether farmers will even give them the chance to use it. Because at the end of the day, the farm economy does not run on circuits and sensors. It runs on relationships, and those relationships are in pieces. Still, Deere's pivot to sustainability is not purely performative. There are signals that the company is trying to rebuild, not just rebrand. It has opened conversations with legislators about expanding repair access. It has donated to agricultural education programs and pledged to invest in underserved rural communities. But whether these steps are meaningful enough to restore loyalty remains to be seen. After all, it is far easier to manufacture a robot than to manufacture trust. But Deere is not the only one with a decision to make. Because while the company looks for redemption through innovation, others are building entirely new futures from the ground up. The fight to save the family farm. This isn't just about economics, it's about saving a way of life. Across the United States, a quiet but powerful movement is growing. Farmers, communities, and local innovators banding together to rescue the small family farm from extinction. For too long, policies and corporate consolidation have favored industrial-scale agriculture. But now, a new generation is pushing back with ideas, models, and methods rooted in local control, regenerative techniques, and shared ownership. One of the most promising signs of life is the rise of community cooperatives. In regions hit hardest by Deere's factory closures and rising equipment costs, farmers are forming co-ops to pool resources and share machinery. Instead of each farmer buying a six-figure tractor, the community invests in one and rotates its use. These co-ops also help negotiate better prices on seed, fertilizer, and insurance, giving family farms a fighting chance against the economies of scale that giant agribusinesses enjoy. Meanwhile, microgrants and local loan programs are emerging to help new farmers access land and basic equipment. These aren't billion-dollar federal bailouts. They are community-led initiatives, banks working with counties, nonprofits partnering with land trusts, and regional networks stepping in where Washington has failed. Their goal is to lower the barriers to entry so that younger farmers can enter the profession without drowning in debt. Culturally, there is a renaissance underway. Young farmers are embracing regenerative agriculture, methods that enrich the soil, reduce chemical usage, and make farming more resilient to climate extremes. Local food movements are flourishing. Farm-to-table restaurants, urban farmers markets, and CSA programs are reconnecting consumers with growers in their region. In many ways, these efforts are more than practical. They are philosophical. They represent a deliberate return to farming as a communal, dignified, and sustainable practice, rather than a corporate output system. But none of this happens in a vacuum. For every grant program or co-op success story, there are still hundreds of farmers struggling to access capital, losing land to mega firms, or going bankrupt after a failed harvest. And while cultural momentum is important, without systemic support, these grassroots efforts will remain small and fragile. Because saving family farms is not just a question of innovation, it is a question of will, and unless the people in power decide to fight for that way of life, it may vanish before the next generation can inherit it. Can farming be saved? The future of farming won't be decided in Washington or Wall Street. It will be decided at the checkout line. For all the policy debates, trade wars, and corporate posturing, the survival of American agriculture ultimately depends on how we, the people, choose to engage with the food system. If consumers continue to buy the cheapest products, regardless of origin or farming practices, the system will keep rewarding volume over values. But if more people begin to prioritize local produce, community-supported agriculture, and sustainability, the market will shift. What you buy and where you buy it has the power to shape the supply chain. It is not just economics, it is a vote. At the same time, investors play a crucial role. Venture capital is beginning to flow toward ag-tech startups, regenerative farming platforms, and rural innovation hubs. These companies are small now, but they represent an alternative future, one where agriculture is high-tech, community-based, and globally competitive without being extractive. The question is whether investment will scale in time to challenge the giants. Could John Deere be replaced, not just by another brand, but by a network of decentralized cooperatives, open-source machinery designs, and farmer-led innovation? It is not only possible, it is already happening in pockets around the world. The only question is whether it can spread before the old system finishes collapsing. Because farming is not dead, but it is fragile. And if the collapse continues unchecked, the next generation may inherit a food system dominated by 5 corporations, reliant on foreign machinery and devoid of independent growers. We all have a role in this outcome. The consumer, the farmer, the investor, the policymaker. We are all part of the agricultural economy. And if we want something better, we cannot wait for John Deere or Washington to fix it. Because if John Deere can leave the American farmer behind, it's up to us to decide who takes their place. Farming built this country, but if we let the collapse continue, we may not get a second chance. If this video opened your eyes, share it with someone who still believes in America's farms. Subscribe for more stories the corporations don't want told, and we'll keep digging, so you're never left in the dark.